Good morning, friends. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Stony Brook. My name is Lorraine Stidd, and I am happy to be serving as your worship associate this morning, along with Pastor Madelyn Campbell. I want to offer a special welcome to any of you who are visiting us or here with us for the first time today. We are delighted to have you here with us, and we look forward to getting to know you. Please plan to stay following the service and join us as our guests for coffee hour. For those who are with us online, you can find small group chats by signing off after the service and returning to the link on the website. Whether here in person or online, you'll find lots of friendly folks to answer any questions you may have about us. And here are some special announcements. Next Saturday evening, March 4th at 6 p.m., we will be kicking off our stewardship campaign with a celebration here in our fellowship building. We will enjoy a cocktail hour accompanied by traditional Irish music provided by John Morris and members of his Irish band. Also, there'll be a delicious catered dinner and entertainment by Claudia Jacobs and Dan Weymouth. You don't have to bring anything. Just come and enjoy the evening with old and new fellowship friends. Contact Joanne Hammer to RSVP. Her contact information is in the newsletter and directory, or RSVP in person to Joanne, Ridge Hall, or John Morris after the service. Please RSVP by tomorrow, Monday, February 27th. And if you're watching from home, please send an email to Joanne right after this service if you plan to attend. Childcare will be available, and please contact Deb Little to make childcare arrangements. That's Deb. And now the next announcement, I'm excited to say that the worship associates are announcing the theme for our summer services this year, Long Island. We invite each of you to consider leading one of these services and submitting your proposal to us no later than March 31st. This year, you will have the option of doing this on your own or in collaboration with our minister, Pastor Madelyn, on certain days. See the March newsletter for all the details and speak to any of our worship associates with any questions. And finally, the fellowship cookbooks are here. Please stop by the table at the back of the sanctuary after service to purchase your copy. Look for Colleen or Linda. The book contains a wonderful collection of favorite recipes from friends and members, with selections for everyone from vegan to carnivore. This is a fundraiser with all proceeds going to the fellowship, and also a beautiful gift for yourself or somebody you love. We ask you to please pay by check or cash.
Come, enter into this space made holy by our presence. Enter into this hour made holy by our intention. Enter in, where we are bound together by our covenant. Enter in, that we may prepare ourselves for the work ahead. Enter in, let us worship together.
I have asked Michelle Massimo to light our chalice this morning. The flaming chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. We kindle the flame of our faith in the cup of our covenant with these words, taken from Worship Web. These are words by Kiakiali Bordner. Come together again, gather in love. Light the fire of hope, build the foundation. Commit together again, gather in truth. Light the fire of freedom, build the entryways. Continue together again, gather in community. Light the fire of the future, build the shelter.
Okay, I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our first hymn, number 118, This Little Light of Mine. I'm going to invite you to put your hymnals down. Forget the hymnals. I will call out to you the next verse, even possibly some that aren't in the hymnal. Are we ready? The first is this. Yes.
That was an adventure, right? Good morning to everyone. Lovely. I'm Deb Little. I serve this congregation as the Director of Religious Education. This month, we've been talking about some of the struggles to end racism and oppression in this country. It's been a little heavy. Today, I'm going to tell a story about some small kindnesses in times of great inequality. Kindnesses that happened between two people, or maybe a few more. Kindnesses that led to a big change. It's good to remember that small actions to treat others fairly in systems of great inequality can matter a lot. The story is of two immigrant families living in California, one family of Japanese immigrants and the other from Mexico. Gonzalo Mendez Sr. moved to California from Mexico in 1919 when he was 7 years old. He had to leave school after 5th grade to help his mother on the farm, but he always wished he had finished school. In 1935, Gonzalo married Felicitas Gomez, an immigrant from Puerto Rico. And Gonzalo and Felicitas worked in the fields for 3 years, saving their money. And then they opened a restaurant in Santa Ana, California, which is in Orange County, south of LA. Gonzalo became a US citizen at age 30. They had 3 children who were all US citizens by birth, although they were racially classified as Mexican. The Santa Ana School District did not exclude Mexican children, so the 3 Mendez kids were able to attend an integrated school when they began public education. Now, Gonzalo worked with a white Jewish banker in a nearby town. This banker, Frank Monroe, did not discriminate against his customers on the basis of race. Indeed, Mr. Monroe visited Gonzalo's restaurant every weekday. Now, he probably went for lunch, but he also collected the day's revenue from Gonzalo and took it back to the bank to deposit so that Gonzalo didn't have to leave his restaurant during the day. This kindness and the friendship that developed between these 2 men challenged the systemic racism of Southern California, which segregated public services and areas like the public swimming pool. Now, in Westminster, California, a farming community nearby, a Japanese and Japanese American family lived on a farm. The first generation, or Issei parents, Seima and Masako Munemitsu, pardon my pronunciations, were not allowed to become citizens under US law. So they rented the land, and when the owner died, she gave the family the right to purchase the land. This was a kindness that recognized their deep commitment to the farm. But the parents weren't citizens, and so they could not legally own the land. A trusted Japanese-American citizen friend became a guardian to their oldest son, who was nicknamed Tad, and this allowed Tad, who was a US citizen by birth, to own the land. The Munemitsu family also worked with Frank Monroe, the banker, as their banker. Tad told his children that Mr. Monroe was, quote, about as honest a man as you can find, very honest and sincere, with no prejudice towards us. Now, these 2 families continued with their restaurant and farm businesses in the 1930s, raising their children, living their lives. But everything changed, as I'm sure you know, on December 7th, 1941, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, bringing the US into World War II. 2 months later, on February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. This order required all Japanese and Japanese American, so citizens, all those people living on the coast, to leave their homes and move to incarceration camps in remote desert wastelands. Families were required to deal with any property or possessions within a month or so. Now, the Munemitsu family did not want to sell their land and their farm. They had been working hard to develop it. They had a lot of farm equipment. They had homes, actually, for migrant workers. So Tad went to speak with Frank Monroe. Mr. Monroe had another idea. Why not lease the farm on an annual basis to another farmer? It seems it took some time to work this out. The historical record is not completely clear. But ultimately, Mr. Monroe reached out to his friend Gonzalo Mendez, the restaurant owner, who had often spoken of returning to farming. And so it happened. The Mendez family leased the Munamitsu's farm while the Munamitsu family was sent to relocation camps. I'm not going to tell you about their experiences in the camps, that's a tale for another day, but Gonzalo Mendez was an ideal tenant. In addition to taking incredible care of the farm and the land, he was so concerned that his rent money get to the Munamitsu family that he drove 6 hours each way for several months to bring the money to the family, which helped them buy supplies, of course, in the camps. Now, the war came to an end, and the Japanese internees began to return to their communities in 1945. When the Munamitsu family arrived back on their farm in Westminster, the Mendez family was living on the land and still had a one-year lease. So the Munamitsu family moved into a worker cabin on the farm, and they became the tenants of their tenant. For a year, the Mendez and Munamitsu children were friends and neighbors. They did not reunite until the early 2000s when a filmmaker contacted Janice Munamitsu, Tad's daughter, to learn about their farm and rental to the Mendez family. Why was a farm worker interested in the Mendez family? Does anyone here know? Well, Gonzalo and Felicitas and their children fought to integrate the schools in Westminster, California. In Westminster, where the farm was, the Mexican children were sent to a segregated school that definitely was not separate but equal. Sylvia Mendez, a 9-year-old child at the time, sat in a courtroom for 5 days waiting to testify about the conditions in the schools, if called. But she didn't really understand that her parents and the other 4 families involved were fighting for justice. So she says, I just thought they wanted us to be able to go to a beautiful school with a nice playground, not the horrible school with the electric fence. In 1947, a federal court ruled that this segregation of Mexican citizens was unconstitutional. And because it's federal court, it applied to all of California and several adjoining states. Later that year, Earl Warren, the governor of California, signed a law officially ending segregation in public schools in California. 7 years later, Earl Warren, now Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, would write the decision in Brown versus Board of Education, legally ending segregation in all public schools. There's much more to the stories of these 2 families, and there's a book about them. You can ask me the title later, but I'm going to leave it here. I've told you about some of the incredible stories of small acts that challenged systemic racism and helped these families weather the discrimination of their time. Amen. So now, will the children join Susan and head back, and I'm going back there too, head back to the RE classroom. Let's sing the children out with the Reeb Children's Benediction located at the back of your hymnal.
Before we move into our time of meditation, we're going to have a little practice with the hymn we will sing following the minute of silence. We're going to sing number 188, Come, Come, Whoever You Are. You may sing the words as written, or you may choose to sing the drone that goes underneath. Pastor Madelyn is going to teach us the drone.
Though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times. So we can sing that. You can choose whichever part you want, and the drone just keeps doing that underneath. And you can switch too. You can go back and forth if you prefer. Got it? Good.
Our meditation reading this morning is Prayer for Living in Tension by Joseph M. Cherry, as printed in Voices from the Margins, which is an anthology of reflections written by Unitarian Universalist ministers who hold typically marginalized identities. This is Prayer for Living in Tension. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. Thank you. Our first reading this morning is from the prophet Amos, chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. Amos is considered by biblical scholars to be the earliest of the prophetic books. It marks a turning point in the history of the religion of Israel. Amos is passionate about his concern for the oppressed, and beginning in the 19th century, and beginning in the 19th century has been appealed to as the classic statement in Hebrew scriptures concerning social justice. Amos himself was believed to be a shepherd, thus not born to the priesthood. The book is dated to the mid-8th century before the Common Era, or BCE. This commentary was taken from the New Interpreter's Bible, Volume 7. This is the NRSV translation. And here are Amos's words. I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals, I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like water, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Our second reading is Tali by Abi Janamanchi, also found in Voices from the Margins. I have stuck it out in this faith, even through doubt and deep ambivalence, because this is the way I want to live my life. My Unitarian Universalism lets me live out my Hindu faith. It helps me be a better Hindu and a better human being. I stay because Unitarian Universalism has a healing message for a broken world yearning for reconciliation and wholeness. I stay because Unitarian Universalism is committed to working through race and class, homophobia and ableism, though we have much to learn and far to go. I stay to celebrate my multi-hyphenated identity, not so much as an American melting pot, but rather a South Indian thali, a selection of tasty dishes in different bowls, presented on a single plate. Each dish tastes different and does not necessarily mix with the next. They belong to each other because they complement each other in making the meal a satisfying repast. I stay to find the strength to live honestly among the various interstices of my life, to take responsibility for the ambiguities of my pluralistic identity while seeking common ground with others. I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn number 121, We'll Build a Land.
Oh,
Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That is a vision, yeah? So, we've been talking a lot about covenant in different ways. We've been talking about our UUA covenant and the proposed changes to the language in our UUA covenant. We haven't talked a lot about our covenant in this congregation. I suspect we will eventually, but you know we do have a congregational covenant, right? Because you worked on it. And we talked about how the proposed language for our UUA covenant moves us into really a call to live into and live out our covenant. It's not just aspirational language, it calls us into the work. So what's next? What's next? Because we can sing about it and talk about it and worship, but how do we live into that covenant? Now, through Amos, God tells the Israelites that God despises their offerings and their shows of worship. Why? Why is God annoyed? I was going to use a word that wasn't a pulpit word. Why is God annoyed at the Israelites? Why does God despise their shows of piety? Because they weren't living out and living into their covenant. Because they were making great shows of being pious. But they weren't doing anything to help the oppressed among them. Now, in biblical terms, the oppressed is usually expressed as widows and orphans. Why widows and orphans? Because women typically didn't own land and couldn't provide for themselves, and nor could orphans. So they're not the only oppressed people, but they're a good model in ancient times for oppressed people. So the Israelites, they weren't caring for the oppressed among them. And Amos, this prophet, comes along and says, you better, or else. Which is what a lot of the prophets were telling them. So, are we living into our covenant? And could we do a better job, and how do we do it? What's next? We know the words. We say the words. We come together in worship. I think this is important. I encourage you to continue to come together and worship. You know, we have people joining us online from as far away as the Adirondacks and as nearby as Sayville. And not necessarily every Sunday, but this camera. Hi. Okay, I keep looking at the wrong camera. So they're joining us frequently. So we come together and we talk about this stuff. But what does the covenant call us to do? Well, one thing that we do is we put out there, right out on right out on Nichols Road, who we are and what we're going to support, right? We have our Black Lives Matter banner that's gone up again, yes? Yay? Yay. And every time somebody tears it down or defaces it, we find better and stronger ways to get it up, right? Right. I'm looking at the person who usually does a lot of that engineering. And we have that other sign next to it that says, in the rainbow, in a rainbow, all the things that we support and get behind. Love is love, right? No one is illegal. A whole list of things. So we've put that out there on Nichols Road, but is that enough? Is that enough? We talk a lot about the actions that we can do. Voting. I hope everybody here who's over 18 is registered to vote and votes regularly. And then contacting our representatives at every level, because things start locally, right? Do you know what's going on in your own community here? You can call your representatives locally. And in New York State, you can call your state representatives. Be a thorn in their side. Make them roll their eyes when they see your number coming across the phone. Be an irritant. And at the national level, you have senators and representatives, and you can contact the White House also. So that's some of the political stuff that we can do. We can do works to help people right now in our communities. So you've probably heard this story about a person walking along and sees a baby floating in the river. Oh no, there's a baby in the river, and gets a net and pulls the baby out. And then there are two more, and the person pulls out those babies and gets some more people involved, and people keep pulling the babies out of the river. And finally, one person says, I wonder how come all those babies are in the river. And while most of the people are busy pulling the babies out of the river, which is important work, that one person goes upstream to discover the person throwing the babies in. And then that person stops the person from throwing babies into the river. It's important to fund food banks. It's important to support homeless shelters. It's important to find ways to help people with their health care costs. But it's critical that we do the work together to end the need for food banks and homeless shelters and paying off other people's medical debts. But that work takes longer, and we don't see the results right away. It's not always as gratifying. In fact, it can be downright discouraging. Perhaps you call your representative on a regular basis and your representative just keeps blowing you off. I can't imagine that that would happen anywhere, but perhaps it does. It's discouraging, but we keep at it. Now, the other thing we have to do is we have to keep at it together, because there's more power in numbers. Who likes power? That's it. I mean, I want power. Power is important. It's important in being able to live stream our services, right? If we didn't have power, we couldn't do that. And it's important in doing the work of fighting oppression, of being anti-racist, of learning how to be anti-racist, of learning how to be truly multicultural, of learning how to work against oppression. In learning to do that work together, one of the things that we have to learn, especially those of us who carry more privilege than others, those of us who are white, who are cisgender, who are heterosexual, one of the things we need to remember is we can't expect everyone else to bend toward us, and we don't have all the answers. So if we're going to do this work out in the community, we have to remember we don't have all the answers. I know some folks here use wheelchairs at least part-time, right? And I've had a lot of foot surgeries, and after one of my foot surgeries, I was using a wheelchair. And you know, I'd be sitting and talking to somebody like out on a path, and people would come up and start pushing my chair. They didn't ask me if I wanted to go anywhere, they just start pushing me. What the heck are you doing? Heck is a substitute for another word that isn't a pulpit word. I don't need to, I can roll myself. I don't need you to, and I wasn't going there anyway. Stop it. Stop it. But at the end of my workday, when I'd be out by my car struggling on one foot to get my wheelchair into the back of my car so that I could then work on my crutch, hardly ever did anybody come by and say, hey, do you need any help? Because I surely would have accepted some help at that moment. So the first thing we need to learn to do is to ask people, do you need any help? Can you say that? Do you need any help? Yeah. And then if they say yes, the answer is not, oh, I know exactly what you need. The answer is, how can I best help you? Can you say that one? How can I best help you? No, I hardly heard that. How can I best help you? We need to leverage our privilege and then learn how we can work with other folks. Now, my beloved colleague, the Reverend Abi John Machi, gave us that lovely reading from Voices from the Margins, and he talks about Tali. We need to get away from the idea of the melting pot. If you've ever been to the museum at Ellis Island, anybody been to the Ellis Island Museum? Oh, it's fabulous. And there's a picture of my great-grandmother on the walls there. If you've ever been to that museum, you know that there are exhibits on how the daughters of the American Revolution, can you be any whiter than that? The daughters of the American Revolution would teach those poor, ignorant immigrants how to be Americans by stripping them of their traditional clothing and dressing them like real Americans, and teaching them all the American things, making them just like us. See, melting pot, isn't that wonderful? It's not wonderful. we need to celebrate our differences. We are not a melting pot. We must not be fondue. We don't want to absorb and homogenize everyone who comes into our doors. We must learn to be tali, or as some other folks say, gumbo, right? All those wonderful things coming together to make something new and beautiful. When we work together like that, when we celebrate our differences, we can become more aware, first of all, of what those differences are, so we can start to see oppression better. Being in a privileged space often means that we are privileged to not see or understand the oppression and the microaggressions against others. But when we really and truly see one another, when we know who each of us are, we can see the world through a broader lens. And we can ask ourselves, gee, if something's made an awful assumption about who all of us are here. Now, one of the things about Tali and about gumbo is that all of those parts complement one another, and we have to be able to complement one another. That's complement, not compliment, right? It's good to complement one another too, but we want to complement one another. We don't want to be the grapefruit in the fruit salad. Do you know what I'm talking about? I mean, I like grapefruit, but when you put grapefruit in a fruit salad, what does everything in the fruit salad taste like? Grapefruit. So we need to learn to recognize the work we need to do, to ask people how we can best help you. In a group, that often means our group going to another group and saying, how can our group, how can our congregation support you? What is the work you need us to do? And we need to be mindful not to make it all about me, not to overpower everything, but to complement one another. Then, our worship, our solemn assemblies, our offerings will really mean something. Are you ready to live out our faith? Maybe? Are you ready to live out our faith? Yeah. Okay. Are you ready to live into our covenant? Yes? Well, then let's get busy. Beloveds, namaste.
Each Sunday, we share our plate offerings with an organization that does work in the world aligned with our principles. This is a spiritual practice. This month, Share the Plate organization is the Women's Diversity Network. This organization works to promote positive health outcomes for Black women and other vulnerable populations. They join advocacy groups to work to eliminate racial bias and systemic racism in policing and community safety. You may make your gifts on the plate or online. For those online, the link to donate is in the chat box. The offering will now be gratefully received.
Beautiful musical offering. Do you know, offertory is actually the music, and that's how it started, as the musical offering, and that certainly was a beautiful musical offering. Will you join me in dedicating our offering? The words are in your order of service. To the work of our faith, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives and these, our offerings. Amen. Thank you. I invite you to, nope, I think is that right? Yes, I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our final hymn, number 119, Once to Every Soul and Nation. Beloveds, oh, you may stay up for the benediction. If you're comfortable sitting, that's fine. Beloveds, go in peace. Go in love. Go in covenant and do the work of the world and go always in the footsteps of the holy. Amen. And now we extinguish our chalice flame, for our worship has ended and our service begins.